Righty-ho. Welcome everybody to our final session, the last of the 6 steps, the review process. So over the next wee while, we're going to have a look at why the review process is important, and talk about really why you should do it, how you should do it, and what type of processes work. So settle back. I hope your coffee's still hot, and feel free to pop through questions on the chat to David, and we'll get that. And we've got a couple of polls on the way just to make sure you're still awake as well. Our normal disclaimer, obviously, class advice. I don't have a disclosure statement. I won't be receiving any commission for presenting this, but I will be charging a small fee. So why is the review step important? Well, as we have just said, for those of you that are AFAs, if you have a look in your ABS, I'm imagining it says something, or even in your secondary disclosure, that we follow the 6-step international advice process. And of course, the 6th step in that process is review. So if you say you do it, then you probably should do it. But I think there's a more important reason to do it than any compliance reason. And that is because I think it's good for business. When we look at we've been through over 200 advice businesses around the country, we see different types of businesses. Those that focus on new sales or product sales, I should say, and then we look at those that provide advice around recommendations or products, and then we look at those that actually provide advice on an ongoing basis. And there definitely are layers of that. It was interesting for those of you that attended the NZFAA conference. You would have seen that the debate around how people get paid on what they get paid for, the value of advice. So yeah, sometimes people need advice in a one-off situation. Some people are looking for advice on an ongoing basis, but I think it's the clients that will probably determine that. But it is about customer experience. What is the customer experience that you would like your business to deliver? We have clients who are very successful at implementing, for example, mortgages or insurance, who say to clients, well, come back and see us when you want to. They don't offer any particular ongoing service. They focus on implementation. Nothing wrong with that business model at all. That's their chosen business model, and they do what they say they do. Others do say, hey, we are here to help you. We're here to support you. And if you, for those of you at conference who saw the NZFAA survey results, when asked what makes clients, what makes unhappy clients and potentially bad for business, was either lack of contact or lack of ongoing service. When we review business around the country too, when we see replacement business, one of the reasons we see used is that, I've had this policy for 8 years and I've never seen anybody from the company, or never seen the advisor who sold it to me. While that may not be a valid reason for replacing business on its own right, because obviously we need to assess the product suitability, it is a reason that creates the opportunity for the new advisor coming in. So while the product might be suitable, while you might have sent a newsletter, while you might have sent an email or a newsletter offering a review, is that actual just contact with the client? So the other way of looking at this, obviously what makes them unhappy, I guess, is the glass half empty view of it. But if you were to then look and say, if I was going to set up an advice business and do it well, how can I make sure I have happy clients? Then we see what makes them happy from the survey. Really good to see clear, straightforward communication. And it was interesting listening to Jeff just before when he talked about the changes they're making to their statement of advice, about using the language that they use when they talk. We're big believers in capturing client words and putting them back when talking about objectives or needs or circumstances. and also using the words that you use to describe the services or the products that you recommend. That goes to show, well, I think it's about the 5th point down, understanding needs and listening. If you put in that you've listened to the clients and put their words back and they can see that, then we're getting into that situation where they go, oh, this business understands me and what I want. When we talk about the differences around services too, the difference between just a product implementation or limited advice right through to sort of full planning, full service, I think there are times too as an industry where we assume everybody should go through the same process at the, or we try to force people who want product implementation into advice, and vice versa. We have people who want advice who get pushed through in product implementation. So I think that's a key point to understand what type of engagement a client wants to have, and we've covered that off earlier. But we can see here what makes them happy is availability and contact and responsiveness to action. So that's a really good set of standards and would be an interesting to survey clients on, to say, hey, what does make you happy? So the type of interactions we're looking at for an advice business, we think there are only 4 types of interaction that advice businesses have, whether it's investment, whether it's mortgages, insurance. Obviously, there's a newer client who you give advice to and then hopefully agree some implementation of service or product. The second type is new clients, where there is that product sale. They come and see you, they say, I want 100,000 life cover for the mortgage, or I just want a mortgage, just get me the, the deal, and we do that, we implement the product. Obviously, if you've given somebody advice and they become an existing client, then they're under advised. We think that's quite different if they're an existing client who's product only. Interestingly enough, when we look at the way these processes work, generally most advice businesses are set up around the new client advice. They use the same terms of engagement, same documentation, same fact find, no matter which one of those 4 engagements we are. Our suggestion from a review process point of view, which are the bottom 2 sections, obviously if you've got a client who's product only, your review process should be, well, be twofold. 1, are you reviewing the product, or 2, are you moving them into become advice clients? Once they are advice clients, then obviously we get, the business should end up rotating around existing clients who are under advice. So that's really when we're talking about the review process, we're looking at how do we transition product clients through to advice clients, and then how do we review or look after or support clients once they are under advice. What are the regulatory requirements, or what is it that we have to do around review? And this is a really interesting point. So I think we've got a little poll just to make sure you're all awake.
We have. Hang on a second. I'll just fire this poll up.
So the poll we're looking at is reviews. They are required. So financial advisors are required to do reviews with clients, and that is stated either in A, the Financial Advisors Act, B, the Code of Conduct for AFAs, C, the Financial Markets Conduct Bill, or D, industry best practice. So if you could please select which one of those reviews are mentioned or required.
Okay, so for those of you not familiar, there should be a quick poll screen up on your screen. If you just want to answer. Well, actually, this particular question,
music, David.
We do. We've this particular question has more than what you can vote for more than one, actually, if you want to.
Can you?
You can on this one. So.
Oh, good.
Only half the people voted so far. The rest must still be asleep.
They're suddenly googling it.
Yeah. 70%. So there's still 75, 3/4. Give it 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Those in groups were probably debating it.
So I'll share the results, shall I, Barry?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, so the results. Poll results. Reviews are required by the Financial Advisors Act, 48%. Code of Conduct for AFA, 52%. Financial Markets Conduct Bill, 14%, and 71% industry best practice. So there's obviously some double voting there. So
That's fine. Yeah, no. Well, that's really good, because the actual answer to the question is industry best practice. Now, that might surprise some people, but there is no thing in the code standards for AFAs that says you must complete reviews. There's nothing in the Financial Advisors Act that mentions reviewing clients. And if people are surprised by that or wonder why that is, it's because financial advice takes many forms, and that's why we come down to what I guess is a principles-based regime. So industry best practice is taken as the 6-step process. So when anyone says advice, or financial advice in this case, we talk about engaging with a client, disclosure, scope of engagement terms, the fact find needs analysis, applying your specialist knowledge. Interesting hearing how Jeff's changed that process, or evidencing that process. We then present the advice to the client, we agree what to implement, and then of course step 6 is review. Which is why it's interesting when we say, well, does a review have to be done? That depends. It depends on the type of advice, business and practice and service offer you are offering clients. So you can be a financial advisor who says, I will sell you or I will help you implement a mortgage and you'll never see me again. Absolutely nothing wrong with that from a regulatory point of view. Would we suggest it as a business model? Nah, maybe not. So being a principles-based regime though, we have to be careful. Things that could apply, could be that if you're a member of a professional body or code, there may be something in that mentions either practice standards, the international 6-step process, ongoing support of clients or being there for them in the future. So just check, because those are the type of things that you could already be bound by that you don't realise. In the code standard 1 is, you must put the client's best interests first. Therefore, one of the things AFAs have to do is make sure that their advice services are suitable for the client. In other words, if your service was, I can provide class advice for KiwiSaver, and a client comes to you and says, I want retirement planning to figure out how I can afford retirement to be, how I can afford it when I want to retire, then as an AFA, if that was not your service, you shouldn't just say, well, I can put KiwiSaver in place and leave it at that. You should go, actually, you need retirement planning. It would be the same for mortgage brokers as well. A client might come to you and says, we're looking to borrow a house, but we want to get it under control. We want a debt management plan. We want to do all that. Well, if you don't do that, then theoretically, it's not in the client's best interests. So for AFAs especially, the client's best interest could be brought into account as a reason why reviews should be offered. Whenever it gets to court, and it was interesting Jeff talking about a little bit about that today, barring any actual regulation, the courts would always refer to industry best practice, and they would bring in a subject matter expert, not a small to medium enterprise, but a subject matter expert to look at a case. And if the client said, oh, we haven't had a review for 7 years and this income protection didn't pay out because I'm now self-employed or whatever the heck might have happened, then the courts or the prosecution may bring in something and say, what should have happened? And you might have the president of one of the associations going, well, they should have reviewed it and offered reviews and da 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 da. And the courts will go, oh, right, okay, well, then we should have done that, even if you're not a member of that association or professional body. Under the Financial Advisors Act, there is a thing saying about being misleading and or deceptive. So this would come back to the whole do what you say you do. If you've said to your clients, we do reviews, we do annual reviews, we do 6 monthly reviews, and you don't do it, then that's potentially misleading, and any financial advisor can be caught under the Financial Advisors Act. Also, watch out for your product provider agreements. There's a debate that goes on quite a bit about commission and renewal commission and service commission. For insurance people, renewal commissions are sometimes a earned right because you have implemented the business with that product provider. And the product provider says, we'll pay you an initial commission and then we'll pay you a renewal commission for the life of the product. That has nothing to do whether you offer service on an ongoing basis. Though, be careful, because sometimes the product provider agreements do say that you must provide an ongoing service to maintain an agency with them. And some companies pay what's called a service commission. So you could be caught up or construed with that. So make sure you understand what you're getting paid for if you are getting ongoing remuneration from companies. And we've probably already stated this morning, it's come up twice already. The golden rule really is do what you say you do. If your documentation, and I've seen processes which have stated we follow the 6-step process, so it says we do reviews. The statement of advice says we do reviews regularly, and then we've seen there is no process for review in place. We would suggest that's a gap or a risk to the business. But so in saying that, our second poll for today would be to ask those of you online, do you have a documented client review process in place now?
Okay, another test to see who's still awake.
Poll is open.
Oh, much quicker response this time. So half the people have voted. Another few seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Still a few people not voting on these things. Okay. All right. So,
if people are on the phone, can they vote?
It's only done via screen. So,
right.
So share the results. So the answer to your question is, Barry, is from the poll, at least the audience today, 71% do have a documented client review process and 29% don't.
Excellent. See, I knew NZFAA members would be above the norm. Fantastic. Well, that's really good. I guess the next question we could have asked was, do you follow it? But we won't do that because you know whether you do or not. I think it's important to have a documented review process, and the reason for that is it actually makes it a bit more efficient. We're going to talk a little bit about that more so. As you guys know, or hopefully you know, as Jeff mentioned, we do advice process reviews where we go into businesses and have a look at what they do, and that includes the review, what review processes, mechanisms, forms, documentation, etc. that they do. The biggest opportunity, for those of you who don't know, the way we score each of the 87 points we cover off, and 4 of the 87 relate to the review process. We either do green, yep, you've got it, it's good, or yellow, you've got it, but might need modification. Red, you haven't got it, we recommend you should do it. Or blue, here's a development opportunity for your business. The client review process is by country mile the biggest opportunity for development in the majority of practices we see. It's definitely the best bang for buck, and we have seen it changed and implemented into businesses that do focus on offering reviews. In fact, we've seen it be so successful when implemented that businesses stop doing it because it becomes a capacity issue for them. So yeah, if there was one area you were looking to develop or improve for 2014, our suggestion would be to look at the way you do the process. Even getting down just to getting to the questioning and the way reviews are offered can be an opportunity in itself. The common issues that we do see when doing the reviews, where things go wrong or could be improved, I guess, would be a better way of looking at. The first is actually the documentation itself. We see advisors go to a review meeting and they take their normal fact find, their normal scope of engagement with the client acknowledgements of what are the terms, Privacy Act obligations and that. yet there's a good chance the client has already signed that type of documentation when they implemented with you. In some cases, not. In some cases, the clients, if they're product only, or if they were, prior to implementation of your current advice process documentation, then those type of forms might be relevant. So if you go back to the two types of existing clients, those under advice and those product only, you probably would use your normal advice documentation to go and review a product only client. But once a client is an existing client under advice, then the documentation is different. First off, you don't need to run through a full fact find, but you do need to go, what's changed since we last saw you? So assess their circumstances. And like Jeff said, you'd want to be, if you haven't seen a client for a while, there's bound to be some things that have changed relevant to the scope of service or advice that you put in place previously. So for example, if you're reviewing debts and mortgages, well, valuations have changed, incomes have changed, redoing their financials to say, hey, where are we at? Can we get a better deal for you because of the changes to your circumstances? So we see documentation change to asking the relevant questions about changes in their circumstances that then determine whether or not there is a scope of engagement required or some action points required based on the review of the client's circumstances. We see that done over the phone, we see it done via email, and we see it done face-to-face. But the documentation should be a heck of a lot shorter and a heck of a lot easier than initial documentation. So that could be a good save in time and effort for a practice. We see reviews mentioned, and it might be in secondary disclosures, it might be on the website, but yet when we get into the advice process itself, it's not mentioned in the statement of advice, it's not mentioned in a follow-up letter, and there's no communication to the client of what the client experience is going to be like after implementation. Yet there is this, there is the mention that the business does it, but there's nothing to show how that is communicated or agreed with the client. We would think that creates a gap. Also, not a great customer experience because the front end looked really good, and if it is something that they want but they just assumes going to be there, and yet the business doesn't follow through with it, then I think we'd end up with a disconnect and those unhappy clients. Another one we see, as far as this is the process itself, is the review process is when we get a renewal or an update, an annual certificate for an investment from the product provider, that prompts us to offer a review to the client. Now, call me cynical, I've worked for a product provider or two in my time, relying on their systems to communicate with you and set up your client reviews. We wouldn't recommend it, put it that way. I'm sure they're all a lot better now than they were those many years ago that I was there. We think you should have your own process. You should have your own system, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a reminder in Outlook, whether it's in a proper CRM system. And also be able to put in, so we see clients that may have KiwiSaver that started at one time, insurance contract at another time, a mortgage with a different date. Obviously, depending on how many clients you've got and how sophisticated your support is, you may pick up that you've offered them a review 6 months ago with a KiwiSaver, so you don't need to do it now. Yet there can be product reasons why the review needs to be done around anniversary, because changes, migrations, future insurability options happen at anniversary. So setting particular client review months either for the advice versus looking at product renewals and determining whether there's an action required out of there are probably two different things. So we would set review periods for advice separate from product renewals, in our opinion. regularly, we will regularly review your contract, but no definition of that time frame. The other side, flip side of that, is I have seen documentation which says we will review half yearly, quarterly, annually, and every 2 years. So that's quite a burden for a practice, and I think they were meant to delete some of those in their advice documentation. So I think one of the ways you need to review when you think about how we're going to do this and what we're going to do is break down for the client what it is you actually do. So it is part of your offer. And when it's part of your offer, you almost make it an opt-in for the client. So, hey, we do advice. We put together plans. We can put together proposals, product recommendations, and that's the advice component that we offer. If you implement with us, we can do implementation of product or service with or without advice. We can also provide service. And if you think about this, you might have clients with existing products with companies that you haven't provided the implementation for. That doesn't mean you can't become a servicing advisor or give them advice and then provide ongoing service without implementation as well. But if you put your proposition out to the client like that, explaining how you get paid for each step, then you're getting them to opt in either at your terms of engagement stage or after product implementation. You know, what do you want? So the third poll for today is, do you mention reviews to your clients and agree a review time with clients? So do you have evidence in your process that you've agreed a set review period with your clients?
Okay, so the poll should be up now, and we'll give it sort of 30 seconds or so for people to vote. Be nice to get 100% this time, if we can. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Okay, so the results are, so do you mention reviews and agree a time frame with clients? Yes, always 52%, sometimes 35%, rarely 4%, and no, never 9%.
Right. So if we compare that to those that said yes, we've got a process, then there's an opportunity there, I think, for some of them with the 52%, with the 34% and below. So yeah, some good opportunity there.
Yeah, so I think it was
We think it's important.
79% of the previous poll. Was it 71% of the previous poll? Yeah.
Yes. We think it's just important. So there's a couple of places, as I said, where this can actually happen. One is you may have a standard review offer to all clients, and that's just part of them becoming a client of your business, or you can personalize it. And when we talk about reviews as well, there are other parts of the client experience that you may want to offer. So for example, investments, you might say we send quarterly updates, we do half yearly phone calls, and we do annual sit downs. So you agree a review or a service program with a client, and depending on how you, it becomes potentially product or service specific as well. So it doesn't just have to be the old, let's do the annual review. So what are we reviewing when we do a review? And that goes to the point I was just making, I guess. It depends. What is the product? So as I've said, for investments, there are times where you need to stop and review the investments themselves. There are times when you need to stop and review an individual client's portfolio with your standard portfolios or model portfolios that you use and see whether rebalancing is required. Then you need to go, well, hang on, I've reviewed that either at a macro level, and now I have to bring that down to a micro level for each individual client. Then there's actually, if the client's under advice with you, reviewing, well, what's changed in their world that could potentially change the model or risk tolerance of the portfolio, and therefore managing that. So that's quite a lot of work that can be based on, you know, the particular product. For example, so lump sum wrap platform model portfolios will require a lot more work than a KiwiSaver review, for example. Mortgages, depending upon, we have some clients who provide debt management services with their mortgage service, so they're not just providing mortgage implementation, they're providing monthly statements with clients to go through and make sure that if they're using a revolving credit or debt reduction program, that's actually working for them. Obviously, there's the mortgages would be, most reviews would be set around when either floating rates are looking to change and looking to fix, or when fixed rates terms are coming off. But once again, depending upon the type of advice or level of advice you've client, the product could drive a lot of those. Insurance, there's generally two key reasons around product. One is the client's circumstances have changed, therefore we need to review the suitability of the product's benefits and sums insured, versus the client's circumstances haven't changed but products have moved on and we need to look to see whether the product changes would be better for them. Once again, we've already talked about the types of clients. So for example, if they're transactional only, it's probably a product related review. Whereas if they're under advice, then we're looking to review the advice. Also, the remuneration model becomes quite an interesting one. We have advisors in the insurance space who look to take higher renewals so that they can, make the time to actually offer a process of review and service without having to worry about whether or not it affects the revenue model that they follow, and that's been quite successful for a lot of clients. And also the type of agreement you have with the client. What have you agreed with them will determine the timing and what is it that you're actually reviewing. Are you reviewing the client's circumstances and the effect it has on your advice and therefore then the product, or are you reviewing the product and the changes or requirements such as a change in mortgage terms? If you would like to look at your process that you have in place or are looking to put a process in place, we've got a bit of a how-to guide which we're going to outline just over the next few minutes. As with anything in a business, we need to make it a process. Processes really should set you free rather than tie you to a practice. We find that once you divvy up the tasks, once you firstly identify the tasks that need to be done, agree how they're going to be done, make sure the systems are there for it to be done, and then allocate the tasks, it can actually be quite a invigorating process in the fact that things just start to happen. In some of the practices, we have advisors who get to review a list of reviews coming up to determine who are they going to call or who are they going to email. The list turns up on their desk every Tuesday morning and they make the phone calls and make the appointments or have the conversations. The business, the CRM system and the management team are running the rest of the process for them. And then all they're doing is stopping every 6 months to review whether the process is working or not. So there are 5 key steps in setting up a client review process. Step 1, firstly, I would set an objective for the process. And the reason for that is you need something to measure of whether it's working or not. In some cases, we've seen where sub-advisors have been brought into a practice where there are a large number of clients. The objective of the review process, the effectiveness of the review process is to make X amount of appointments. It depends upon your offer to clients. We have some risk businesses who offer a review to a client every year, but if the clients don't respond, they make a point of actually sitting down with them at least every 3 years. And that's the way they've written their review statement in their statement of advice. So depending on the type of product and service, that may or may not fit, but that's their objective. If they sit down with every existing client who's under advice at least every 3 years, then their advice process or their review process is working. Others have, they want to contact client at least X times of a year, and the review offer might make up part of that as well as the review process itself. Some people have said to me, do we say we do a review every year or do we offer a review every year? We would suggest that you offer a review every year, and the way it's offered is to say, hey, if anything's changed in your world, we need to see you. Some people just say, if you want a review, contact us, so don't call us, we'll call you type thing. Once you've agreed what the objectives for the process are, we would suggest segmenting the clients. So it might be that those under advice are offered a different review process to those that are product-only clients. Others will break it down into their clients, A, B, C, D, or AAA, AA, so that no client ever figures out that they're not a top client, A client. And that becomes important because within a practice, you may want to, so for AAA clients, they may be people who are clients that are under advice, but they also might be centers of influence. And you might want to definitely sit down with them every year. And if you're not doing a formal review, you might just want to have lunch with them or catch up with them or talk to them. So that means for the review process, the steps that are taken are different for them than they are for the next set of clients. So segmentation is important. Setting the criteria about how you segment is totally up to you. But it'll obviously be driven by the capacity you have to take the then actions of the review process. So you got 6,000 clients and you've only got one advisor, you're probably not going to do annual reviews for them all, for example. Once you have the segments, then the business needs to make the decision. What are we going to do around offering reviews to each one? So as I said, AAA's, phone call from the advisor, done. So that advisor needs to get a list. Well, here's the AAA's for this month. I'm going to do the calls every Tuesday morning, so I'll divide the list up for the month into 4 for each Tuesday, and I expect that list to be on my desk. I'll make the calls. I'll note the calls in the CRM, done, or I'll make the appointments if required, if there's no review required, end of. The AA's, you might say, right, we want an email to go out to them, and a phone call required if there's a particular reason that we do need. So an office manager or PA may make that particular phone call. A's, a letter might go out or an email might go out just saying, hey, if anything's changed, you call us. Totally up to you on how or why you would do that process. The fourth step is actually then designing the communications that you would use for those. So write the email out so it's a template email. You might want to script the phone call if you've got sub-advisors or other people calling. You may want to, for example, have a theme every year offering a specific update. So for example, you might identify that all clients who are have a Tower Medical policy, that we add in a paragraph to their review letter that says, hey, NIB, have changed. You may have seen the change. So this is where mass customization, and it depends how sophisticated your systems and processes are, but you can actually start to personalize the emails. Hey, we noticed you've got income protection. We haven't seen you for a couple of years. Your income must have changed. We do need to see you. We're going to give you a call next week and make a time to catch up. So while sending a generic email to every client may be good, it can get better if you look at those individual types of clients, types of products as well. We would also suggest putting a timetable or calendar together for all your communications, which really is your customer experience. And it doesn't have to be really scientific. It can just be a nice spreadsheet that sits up on a wall that says, here's the processes or the communications we're going to have and when we're going to have them, and let's program them into the calendar and allocate the tasks out. So for example, if you're going to do the review process, then you'd want to actually have the tasks allocated. So for example, on the 15th of the month prior to the review month, we run the list of clients who have their review coming up in January, if it's the 15th of December, say. That list is then reviewed against the segmentation to see whether or not the clients still fall into the segments of AA, AA, single A. If they do, the lists are then prepared for the phone calls for the AAAs. The emails are personalised for the AAs, and the letter is sent up to be sent out. They might be staggered, those communications, throughout the month. They might go all out at once. Depends on the number and depends how you want to do it. But the tasks might be the office manager produces the list, the advisors review the list, the office manager prepares the communications, the letters are signed by the advisors are sent, the phone lists are given out each Tuesday, something along those lines. Step 5 is actually do it. I've seen processes set up, I've seen businesses talk about them, but actually doing them and making sure it works. So this is why the objective is important. If you are so busy with new clients and you set this process up and it creates a whole lot of work, and depending upon your remuneration model or revenue model, you need to make sure that you can cope with it. So judging the type and the level of communication and offer that goes to clients, it's a judgment call for each particular type of practice. How do you know if you're getting it right? Well, there's only one way really, and that is to ask your clients. If they, I mean, the survey we saw the NZFAA do, and we talked about this in the last webinar, you know, agreeing what you're going to do at implementation, then actually doing it, and then when you talk to clients, things like persistency rates, things like new sales from existing clients or changes, those are the type of measures you'd start to do to see whether or not your review process is actually working. When this is done well, it definitely has an effect on those 4 R's. Revenue protection is a big one around the retention of clients. If the clients know you're there, if they know you understand them, and if they hear from you, the chances of them, you know, getting the person knocking on the door saying, "Hi, we've got an offer. Have you got insurance? Have you seen anyone lately?" You know, those are the types of questions they ask. And if the person says, "Oh, we've got some insurance, but we haven't seen anyone lately," that creates an opportunity for them to get in. We definitely see that review processes provide a large, or for those that have a process built into it around referrals, it definitely does add to the level of referral of the practices. And that's measurable. Some of the work we've seen Tony Vidler do, Strictly Business, a lot of that around getting more clients is based off the communication strategies you have with your existing clients. So the key action points from this particular session would be to review that current process that you have and also the delivery of that process. Have you check through the 5 steps? Have you got a segmentation? Have you got it right? Have you got an objective for this process? So it's more about business, it's more about activity, it's more about the clients than it is about doing this from a compliance point of view, in my opinion. Review the current documentation as well. If you're using the same advice documentation for reviews, then there's an opportunity for you to stop and review how that particular process is done, because it doesn't necessarily need to follow on from the same as you would for new clients. Look at that. Question time. David, have we had any questions come through?
We've had one comment actually from Carol Johnston,
yes.
who's suggested that reviews. She said, "I don't agree a review." What she says is it's stipulated in a statement of advice that a review is important, and that review should be annual or as client circumstances change. So there's no formal process, from what I'm reading, that there's no formal process of agreeing a review with the client at the outset, but just indicating to the client that it's important. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, it's because we're not, I guess, obliged from a regulatory or compliance point of view to do it. A business can almost do what they like around the review process. So we do see businesses sort of say, look, if your circumstances change, you need to let us know, because it could affect the suitability of the products or services we've put in place. Where that would be applicable would be for AFAs. You could get caught under the code around the ongoing suitability of the advice you've given. So if the plan you've put in place for a client is for a long-term need, as an AFA, you're almost obliged to make sure on an ongoing basis that that need would still be met. Carol's statement, so it says we recommend an annual review, but the client needs to contact.
No, so no, she's saying what she's saying that at the time they do the implementation, at the time they agree the advice model that's being implemented. They, in her statement of advice, it says that a review is important and that review should be annual or as client circumstances change. So there's no specific agreement that the client will meet with you on an annual or a biannual or a every 3 year basis.
No.
It's that.
And I think it's agreeing. Yeah, I think if the business then showed that they did offer an annual review, so that could be an email or a letter or a phone call, then that's fine. So we're saying it's an annual reviews are important and should be done annually. So we're going as a professor. So this goes back to the best practice point. So we're going to contact you annually and offer it. If your circumstances have changed, or if they change prior to then, you should contact us. That would be my. So that's if you were looking at it from the AFA, what would they expect to see based on that statement of advice? Is what happens in a year's time, if anything. Because if the client's implemented it, and that's in the statement of advice, it's almost implied that they've agreed that yes, reviews are important.
Yep. Okay, so it's basically the process is okay, but probably in the statement of advice there needs to be some, or beyond the statement of advice there needs to be some follow up to ensure that.
Well, just think about it. I mean, just think about it from when we sort of engage with any other professional. Are we getting? Is this a one-off job, or do you want me to be your advisor on an ongoing basis? And if they do, then when we implement, you say, cool, I think best practice would be, best business practice, not a compliance, but would be to say, right, our service program is, if you have a claim, contact us. If your product changes, contact, or if your circumstances, contact us. We'll contact you once a year, and we're available for reviews if required.
Yeah, and that's what I think. So I think that's what Carol's saying. She's just sort of sent me another note saying her process is not formally agreed with them, but she does review annually anyway. She contacts the clients at least annually anyway. But she does. She thinks the idea of agreeing in advance actually is quite a good idea. Okay. Earlier on in the presentation, you talked about renewals, particularly in the risk space, and supplier agreements. Some supplier agreements remunerating under a service model arrangement rather than a business placed arrangement. Do you know, which providers or suppliers have which model in their agreements?
I don't know currently, so I'm going off my historical knowledge of them rather than my current knowledge of the agreements. But I have had clients contact me where there's been, funnily enough, where there's a change of advisor. So I've had a client complaint with one of my clients who've turned around and said, well, the client shifted servicing advisor, which is fine. So the product provider said, cool, we're now recognizing the new advisor as a servicing advisor, but the renewal stays with the existing advisor. The client and the new advisor have turned around and said, no, we want the clients has said we want the renewal to go to our new servicing advisor. The existing advisor asked for our opinion on it, and so we went through the agreement, and this was with one of the medical health and medical was a medical policy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written in such a way that it vested with the client, with the advisors that had implemented the business, and had nothing to do with, so it had no wording around service. And I can't think of which companies are. There are companies that turn around and call it servicing commission. And also outside of the remuneration, they talk about, and I think it was either AMP or AXA who had a clause that said, we expect you to be, providing ongoing service or support. There's some wording like that in there. But it would be a good project, actually. In fact, it is some work that I have done with Chatswood on wording similar to this in the past. That maybe I'll talk to Russell about doing a review of that, because I know he's done the commission reviews based off the agreements, so that he may have a better insight. So that would be something you and I may be able to pick up for the new year to advise members on.
Could be quite useful. Could be quite useful to members, actually. That would be very useful. Yes. Another comment.
Investments are different because I find investments are different. Generally, there is an ongoing monitoring fee, and it is a monitoring fee, and it's tax deductible because it's a fee for service, etc., etc. So yeah, there's no way you'd get away with saying, well, I was getting paid something for just sitting there doing nothing. I don't, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just another interesting one there is to what extent, at what point, particularly in the investment space, to some degree in the insurance space, at what point, if you've gone down the advice model rather than a product placement model, at what point does no advice become deemed advice in the future? So if you implement a product for a client, or you give them some advice on how much they need, and then implement that recommendation based upon the current circumstances, and then don't review ever, at what point could, let's say, 5 years later, their circumstances have changed to the extent that the cover they have in place is no longer relevant to them? Could the court potentially claim deemed advice by virtue of the fact that there was no...
Yeah, and this is why it's so important, because you'd go back to what was the engagement, what was said, what was agreed. AFAs, I think, would have a tougher time, instead of saying, well, I gave you some advice at one point, and then we're never going to see each other again. And that's why when I talk about saying, well, you say in your secondary disclosure you follow the international 6-step process, you say in your ABS you do that, it says on your website that you do reviews and service and claims similar, it would be very difficult to argue, oh, well, that particular client, I just implemented a product based on their current circumstances and I was never going to see them again. It was the end of the engagement. So starting engagements and ending engagements are probably just as important as starting them.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. A whole other topic by the sound of things. Just a couple more questions. I'm conscious of time. Got another 4 or 5 minutes.
Sure.
Anthony just says, how does the FMA feel about rating individual clients and servicing them differently according to their value to you as an advisor? And then he makes another point, which is that you never know when an A can become a AAA.
Totally, yeah. It comes down to the value to the business is important, but also it's not just the value, it's the type of client they are. So if they're an advice client and they're low value, you've probably still got an obligation to review the advice. To what effort and depth you go to do that, though, there's an economic question that has to be answered. Can the business afford for the advisor to sit down with that client every year and not make any changes? That's a question that needs to be answered. So there's a client suitability bit. So we're quite lucky in some ways because we're under a principles-based regime. The type of advisor service should be suitable for the client. And I also think the product type as well. So yeah, there's definitely nothing wrong. And if you think about it this way, it goes to Carol's point in some way. I'm going to offer the client the opportunity to review and make out the risks of not reviewing if we haven't seen them for 3 years. Hey, if we don't see you at least 2 years, things are bound to have changed. We should sit down. If the client chooses not to come back and do the review with you because it's just a letter and you don't call them, well, that's still okay.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't afford to...
If you're calling your AAA clients it's all it is if you think about it, you're still offering every client a review or the opportunity to review, Some of them, though, you want to definitely sit down with every year because it makes business sense to do it. Others, you want to be able to meet your minimum obligations and actually still make a buck.
Yeah, yeah. But I think Anthony's additional point is, you never know when an A can become a triple A. I think that's a really, really valid point. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. Thank you once again, Barry, for a very informative session and for all the work you've done on this particular program this year. Look forward to the program for
I've
next
really
year.
enjoyed it.
We'll refine the program and launch the details in January of the 2013 program. In the meantime, have a great Christmas, and to the audience as well. I hope you have a fantastic break. I hope you get some quality time with some family and friends. The questionnaire, the survey will should come to you within the next 24 hours, through your email. Please give us some feedback. Your thoughts on how we can improve the sessions going forward would be much appreciated.
Yeah, that'd be good.
We'll look forward to catching you all in the new year. Thanks very much.